You've mentioned that we're now at a juncture where IT could be delivered to a new world and in a new way. Can you elaborate on the idea of tech commons?
Yes, the basic thesis that I have is technology can be delivered to this new world in new ways. So the new way of delivering IT in this new world is going to be through what I call technology commons. Just as we've had grazing lands in the past, or just as we've had communes, or just as we've had shareable goods in factories and ways of shipping goods, electric utilities, everything gravitates to the commons. And why is that important? Well, it's important and to deliver things into a new world in a new way. It goes back to the concept of agility. If you own everything and demand goes away, you're stuck with the excess capacity. If you have a shareable resource, you can start to spread the capacity across and buffer against each other. We're going to start to see that companies will realize that if they avail themselves of commons, even the smallest bank can compete with the largest bank by having the same scale and capacity they do, but sharing it. And in the notion of agility, the very structure themselves of a common, it's a grazing land for technology, allows you to have the downward compressibility and the upward scalability as many share a same resource and can avail themselves of those capabilities. And that gives companies entirely new economics. It starts to mean that perhaps their data center of the future is no data center at all and changes the way the world works. When you're in a world where everyone can share the same lowest common denominator resource, then in fact, how do you distinguish yourself? It's through specialization. So the corollary of this, which may sound brutal, is you don't screw up the commons through special interests. So if you have a grazing field of grass and you have one species that requires a special kind of grass, you don't put it in there because the commons is the common, but you put that separately and you specialize in that. So that's what's going to happen. And eventually when everyone is doing the same specialized stuff, the specialized stuff becomes commons itself. So you have this entirely wonderful evolution. And going back to the discussion we even had earlier when we were just talking about adapting to new needs. I mean, if you're going back to Charles Darwin, and this is not to preach the biology, but he doesn't talk about that it's the strongest or the smartest of the species that survives. It's the species that are able to adapt to change. And that's what this is about. It's adapt to changing business environment, global economic environment, and the changing needs of the global skill sets needed to support this. And that's going to determine the success and competitiveness of the nations.
Given the rapid evolution in technology, which new technologies do you think will have the most impact on IT and the CIO?
Let me start with the role of the CIO first, because that's a foundation and it's pivotal. The role of the CIO really has to change. If you look at the big investment banks of the world, major financial institutions, they all have people they call their chief economists. Something goes a burp in the economy, someone says, here's my chief economist at Morgan Stanley. Well, what happens in your company? Who's your chief technology economist? Technology in a company is not about the latest server. It's not about the latest kind of flash storage or the biggest broadband network. It's managing the inputs and outcomes of technology in a sound economic model that gives the company the resiliency and risk control they need. So I view the CIO of the future as a chief technology economist. That chief technology economist is really determining companies' monetary and risk policy for technology investment, whether that's in a data center or on the shop floor in a process control system. So it's putting this all under one massive envelope of digital and technology economics as a chief economist for the enterprise. But number two, what are the decisions that are made underneath it? They're not all financial. I'm making it sound like it's heavily financial, but it's the deployment models. What goes into the commons? What do we do internally? How do we plan for the future? How are we going to compete? What are the skill sets we need? What are the human people development stuff we need? What do we have to do with security and such? So in fact, in the future, the decision of the CIO has changed. The CIO of the future, I mean, not to push the issue of metrics, but in a technology economy, we have a planet right now, and if you say where you want to go, you have longitude and latitude. And we have GPSs. There's a couple of old adages. I think one says that if you don't know where you are, a map won't help, and if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. I mean, the chief technology economist is going to have to lay down what are the coordinates for the system they're in technology and business terms. Going to have to plot a course to navigate that journey and see that you're on that course and making mid-course corrections, at the same time tracking everybody else's course. We're in a world, this is going to sound strange, you hear about climate change all the time. We've got technology climate change, and companies have got to deal with it. That's the underpinnings. Imagine climate change was faster than anyone has ever calibrated, and you're a trip planner for someone, and they tell you they want to go on vacation 3 years from now in the future. And you tell them to pack a bathing suit, and they get there, they find out this climate change, they really needed skis. Things are just moving around so fast. So the role of the CIO, in some sense, is a trip planner, but that trip is planned on business outcomes, not the technology inputs. And it's the mating of what technologies and deployments will get to the future that the business needs. And the business is allowed to change their plans. So how can they adapt, and then how can they respond to global market conditions and all these things going on? This is not an easy job, and there's no precedent in history for doing it.
So in a sense, they've got to be able to rent the skis as opposed to buy them outright.
That's right, if you think that's one of your risk areas. So the other thing that maybe I've underplayed it, but your question is a good revealing one, it's more than looking at the innovations and technology choices and looking at the deployment models. It's sort of reading the tea leaves and then figuring out what's the right economic model and how do I manage the risks of my choices going forward so I can back out if I have to and change course if I need to.